I stood in the arrivals hall for 3 hours before I finally understood that no one was coming. The automatic doors kept opening and closing. Each time they parted, I felt my chest tighten with hope. Each time they revealed strangers, I felt something inside me crack a little more. My suitcase sat beside me like a loyal dog, patient and still, while I checked my phone for the 20th time. No messages, no missed calls, nothing. I had texted them when I landed. I had told them my flight number weeks ago. I had reminded them the night before I left Singapore. But the screen stayed dark and the crowd thinned, and eventually the janitor started mopping the floor around me like I was just another piece of furniture that had been left behind. It was my father's 70th birthday. That was why I had flown halfway across the world. That was why I had used my saved vacation days, why I had bought gifts I couldn't afford, why I had practiced what I would say to make them smile. I had imagined the reunion so many times, my mother's face lighting up, my father's rare moment of warmth, my sister Isabella running to hug me like she used to when we were children. But I stood alone in an airport that was slowly going to sleep, and I finally called a taxi myself. The driver was kind. He made small talk about the weather, about traffic, about nothing important. I answered automatically while staring out the window at a city I had once called home. It looked different now. Or maybe I looked different. Maybe I had always been looking at it through the wrong lens, seeing love where there was only habit, seeing family where there was only blood. The taxi fare was expensive. I watched the meter climb and calculated how much of my careful savings were disappearing into this ride that should never have been necessary. They lived 40 minutes from the airport. 40 minutes they couldn't spare for the daughter who had flown 12 hours to see them. When I arrived at the house, the lights were on. I could hear laughter from inside, music, the sound of celebration. I paid the driver and pulled my suitcase up the front steps. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stood in the doorway, and no one noticed me for a full minute. They were all there. My parents, Isabella, her husband David, their children, extended family I hadn't seen in years. The dining table was covered with food, with wine, with the good china that only came out for special occasions. Balloons hung from the ceiling, a banner that read "Happy Birthday" stretched across the wall. My father sat at the head of the table, beaming. Isabella saw me first. She looked up from her phone and, for a moment, genuine surprise crossed her face. Then she smiled brightly and called out, "Eleanor, you made it!" Everyone turned. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father blinked at me like he was trying to remember who I was. "We thought you weren't coming," my mother said, already turning back to the table. "You didn't call." "I texted," I said quietly. "I told you my flight number. I told you when I was landing." "Oh, honey, we've been so busy with the party. Isabella handled all the planning. You know how it is." She gestured vaguely at the celebration around her. "Come, sit, eat something. You must be exhausted." No apology. No acknowledgement that they had left me stranded. No question about how I had gotten here or whether I was okay. Just an empty chair at the far end of the table, wedged between two cousins I barely knew. Isabella caught my eye and shrugged apologetically, but she was already laughing at something David whispered to her, already turning away. I sat down in that chair. I ate food I couldn't taste. I listened to toasts that praised my father's wisdom, his generosity, his dedication to family. I watched Isabella accept compliments for organising everything so perfectly. I heard my mother tell everyone how lucky they were to have such a thoughtful daughter. No one asked about my flight. No one asked about my life in Singapore. No one asked why I had come alone, why my suitcase still sat in the hallway, why I looked like I had been crying in the taxi. I realised then, in that moment of invisible presence, that this was not new. This had always been the pattern. I had simply been too hopeful, too desperate to see it clearly. I was the daughter who lived far away, the one who called on birthdays and sent money when they needed it, the one who existed in theory but not in practice, the one who could be forgotten at an airport because Isabella was already here, already handling things, already filling the space I used to occupy. I had spent years trying to prove I mattered. I had worked myself sick to send gifts, to visit, to maintain connections across an ocean. I had ignored the subtle ways they chose her over me, the way they remembered her children's names but not my promotion, the way they displayed her family photos but stored mine in a drawer, the way my birthday always fell on the same week as my father's and we only ever celebrated his. I had told myself it was distance, it was busy schedules, it was nothing personal. But sitting at that table, watching them celebrate without me, even though I was right there, I finally understood. It had always been personal. I had just been too afraid to see it. The party went on for hours. People told stories about my father, about family memories I wasn't part of because I had been working overseas, building a career that had funded many of the celebrations I had missed. Someone mentioned my name once, an uncle asking what I did for work, and before I could answer, Isabella interjected with a vague explanation that made it sound insignificant. I didn't correct her. I just drank my wine and watched. Around midnight, my mother asked me to help clean up. Isabella was tired, she said. The children needed to get to bed. But I had just travelled 12 hours and waited 3 more in an airport, so surely I could load the dishwasher. I did it without complaint. I wiped down counters. I packed away leftover food. I worked alongside my mother in silence while everyone else retreated to comfortable chairs and pleasant conversation. You should visit more often, my mother said as she handed me plates. It's been too long. I had visited 8 months ago. Isabella lived 20 minutes away and saw them twice a week. I'll try, I said instead. The party ended late. People filtered out slowly, hugging my parents, complimenting Isabella, barely glancing my way. When the house finally fell quiet, I went to the guest room. My old room had been converted into a craft space for Isabella years ago. The guest room smelled like storage and disuse. I lay in the dark and felt the weight of all those years pressing down on me. All that effort, all that hope, all that love poured into a family that had learned to function perfectly well without me. My phone buzzed. A work email. Something urgent that needed my attention, even though I was on vacation. I answered it automatically, efficiently, the way I always did. Work never forgot about me. Work always needed me. Work was the only place where my absence was noticed. I must have fallen asleep like that, phone in hand, still wearing my travel clothes. When I woke, my chest felt heavy. Wrong. The room was too bright. Morning sun filtered through curtains I didn't remember closing. I tried to sit up, but my body wouldn't cooperate. The heaviness spread, creeping from my chest to my limbs, thick and inevitable. A heart attack, I understood distantly. Stress and exhaustion and a genetic weakness my father had passed down to both his daughters, though Isabella would probably never experience it. Isabella didn't carry the weight I did. I thought about calling for help. The house was full of family. Someone would hear me. But I didn't call out. I lay there and let the heaviness win. There was something almost peaceful about it. A quiet surrender. An ending that felt less frightening than the continuation. My last thought was oddly mundane. I had forgotten to give my father his birthday gift. It was still in my suitcase in the hallway. A vintage watch I had found in an antique shop in Singapore. Something he would have loved if he had ever noticed it. Then there was nothing. And then there was everything. I woke up to the sound of my phone alarm and I knew immediately that something was wrong. The room was different. The bed was different. The light coming through the window was the wrong colour entirely. I sat up quickly, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. But it was my heart. It was beating, strong and steady and alive. I looked at my phone. The date made me freeze. 3 years earlier. I stared at the screen for a long time, waiting for reality to correct itself. But the date didn't change. The location didn't change. I was in my apartment in Singapore, in my own bed, on a morning I had lived before. This was the day I had booked my flight home for my father's 70th birthday. I remembered this day. I remembered the excitement I had felt, the anticipation. I remembered calling the airline, entering my credit card information, imagining the reunion. But I also remembered dying alone in that guest room. I remembered the party where no one had picked me up. I remembered 3 more years of the same pattern, the same neglect, until my heart finally gave out from carrying all that invisible weight. Both memories existed in my mind simultaneously, clear and undeniable. A second chance, then, or a dream, or madness. I got out of bed and went to the mirror. My reflection looked younger, less tired, but the eyes were different. They held knowledge that didn't belong to this version of myself. They held the weight of a future I had already lived. I made coffee. I sat at my small kitchen table. I thought about what I would do differently. The old Eleanor would have booked that flight immediately, would have called her mother to share the news, would have started planning gifts and imagining embraces and hoping this time would be different. But I had already seen how that story ended. I opened my laptop instead. I checked my bank account. I looked at the money I had been saving for that trip, for gifts, for the taxi ride from the airport, for all the small expenses of trying to belong to a family that had already decided I was peripheral. The flight would have cost nearly $2,000. The gifts, another $500. The taxi, the time off work, the emotional energy of hoping for something that would never come. I closed the laptop and went to work. My colleagues were surprised to see me energized. I had been running myself ragged, they said, for months, taking on extra projects, working late, always volunteering for the difficult assignments. They were right. I had been trying to prove something, even here, trying to make myself necessary because I couldn't make myself necessary at home. But I understood something now that I hadn't before. My value didn't need to be proven. It simply existed. And if people couldn't see it, that was their failing, not mine. I stopped staying late. I stopped volunteering for work that wasn't mine. I focused on my own projects, my own growth, my own life. Within a week, people noticed. My manager asked if everything was okay. I told her I was simply creating better boundaries. She seemed impressed. Boundaries were healthy, she said. I should have set them sooner. When my mother called 2 weeks later, asking if I had booked my flight yet, I almost felt sorry for her. There was expectation in her voice. The assumption that I would come, that I would always come, that my presence could be taken for granted, even as it was simultaneously ignored. I'm not going to make it this year, I said calmly. Work is too busy. Silence on the other end. Then, but it's your father's 70th birthday, Eleanor. He's expecting you. Was he? I wanted to ask. Did he ask about me? Did he request my presence? Or was this just another performance where I was supposed to play my role without acknowledgement? I'm sorry, I said instead. I'll send a gift. A gift, Eleanor. He wants you there, not a gift. Then he should have said so, I replied quietly. He should have called me himself. He should have asked. Another pause, longer this time. He's your father. You shouldn't need an engraved invitation. Apparently I do, I said, because otherwise I'm just supposed to know I'm wanted, even when nothing in our relationship suggests that I am. That's not fair. Isn't it? When was the last time any of you asked how I was doing? When was the last time you remembered my birthday without me reminding you? When was the last time I was included in a decision or a celebration or even a phone call that wasn't about asking me for something? The silence that followed was different, uncomfortable. the silence of someone confronting a truth they had been avoiding. "You're being dramatic," my mother said finally. "Maybe," I agreed, "but I'm still not coming." I did send a gift, a generous one, a beautiful watch, the same one I had brought before, shipped directly to the house with a card that said simply, "Happy birthday, Dad, with love, Eleanor." I didn't call on the day of the party. I didn't check my phone obsessively waiting for photos or updates. I went to dinner with colleagues. I laughed. I drank wine. I enjoyed myself in a way I couldn't remember doing in years. My mother called the next day, her voice tight with something that might have been anger or might have been confusion. "You really didn't come," she said. "I told you I couldn't." Isabella had to handle everything herself. The planning, the guests, the food. She was overwhelmed, Eleanor. We could have used your help. I closed my eyes and felt the old guilt trying to surface. The old instinct to apologize, to explain, to make myself smaller so they would feel bigger. But I had died from that instinct once already. "Isabella is very capable," I said evenly. "I'm sure the party was lovely. Did Dad like the watch?" A pause. "What watch?" "The gift I sent. It should have arrived 2 days before the party." Another pause. "Oh. Yes, I think Isabella put it with the other gifts. There were so many, you know. So many gifts that mine had disappeared into the pile. So many guests that my absence hadn't left a gap. The party had gone on without me, just as I had known it would." "I'm glad it went well," I said. "I have to go, Mom. I have a meeting." I didn't have a meeting, but I had a life to live, and I was done spending it waiting for people who would never pick me up from the airport. The months passed differently this time. Without the constant weight of trying to maintain connections that only ran one direction, I had energy for other things. I took a painting class. I had always wanted to learn, but there had never been time between work and family obligations, and the exhausting effort of trying to be enough for people who had already decided I wasn't. The painting teacher was a woman in her 60s named Ruth, who looked at my first clumsy attempts with encouraging eyes. She told me that art wasn't about perfection. It was about expression, about putting something internal onto something external and letting it exist outside of yourself. I painted my feelings, abstract swirls of colour that made no sense to anyone else but felt deeply true to me. Blues and greys for the sadness, sharp reds for the anger I had never let myself feel. And eventually, slowly, soft golds and gentle greens for the peace that was starting to grow in the spaces where obligation used to live. I travelled to places I had always wanted to see. Japan in cherry blossom season, a small village in Italy where I stayed in a family-run inn and learned to make pasta from scratch. A meditation retreat in Thailand where I sat in silence for 7 days and discovered that silence could be comfortable instead of lonely. I made friends who remembered my birthday, who asked about my day, who noticed when I was sad or tired or happy. Real friends, not just colleagues or acquaintances, people who chose me deliberately instead of accepting me peripherally. I still sent money when my parents needed it. A check for home repairs, a contribution for medical bills. I still answered when they called. But I stopped volunteering information. I stopped trying to force my way into conversations where I wasn't wanted. I stopped performing daughterhood for an audience that had stopped watching years ago. Isabella called me once, late at night, her voice small and confused. "Mom says you're different," she said. "She says you've been distant." "Have I?" I kept my tone neutral. "You didn't come for Dad's birthday. You always come. And you haven't visited since. It's been almost a year, Eleanor." "I always came," I corrected gently, past tense. "Eleanor, what's going on? Did something happen? Did we do something?" I thought about answering honestly. I thought about explaining the airport, the guest room, the slow death from being unloved. But she wouldn't understand. She had never been forgotten. She had never needed to be remembered. "Nothing happened," I said. "I'm just busy with my own life now, that's all." "But we're your family." "I know," I said. And I did know. I knew exactly what kind of family they were. The kind that assumed love without demonstrating it. The kind that expected presence without offering belonging. The kind that measured worth by convenience and loyalty by availability. "You sound cold," Isabella said quietly. "You sound like a stranger." "Maybe I've always been a stranger," I replied. "You just didn't notice before because I was trying so hard to be family." "That's not true. We love you." "Do you? Or do you love the idea of me? The distant sister who sends money and doesn't require much attention? The backup daughter who shows up when called but doesn't take up too much space?" She was quiet for a long time. "I don't know what you want from us." "I don't want anything anymore," I said, and realized it was true. That's the difference. "I have to go," I said before she could ask anything else. "Take care of yourself, Isabella." I heard her start to protest, but I ended the call. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, just with the calm certainty that I had already given them all the chances they deserved. 2 years passed. I got promoted at work. A significant promotion with a title that commanded respect and a salary that reflected my value. My manager told me I had transformed into someone she barely recognized. Focused, confident, clear about my boundaries. She asked what had changed. "I stopped trying to be everything to everyone," I told her, "and started being something to myself." She nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. Maybe everyone carried invisible weights they eventually learned to put down. I moved to a larger apartment with a view of the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows that let in light and made the space feel open and endless. I decorated it exactly how I wanted. Art on the walls from my painting classes. Books I had always meant to read. A balcony where I grew herbs and tomatoes and learned that I could nurture living things when I stopped neglecting myself to do it. I dated someone kind for a while. A man named James who worked in architecture and had gentle hands and asked real questions about my life. It didn't last, not because of anything wrong, but because I was still learning how to let someone see me fully. Still practicing the vulnerability that came from believing I was worth being known. He told me when we ended things that I was one of the strongest people he had ever met, but also one of the most guarded. That someday I would find someone patient enough to wait for all my walls to come down. I thanked him for that, for seeing both things, for not demanding I be easier than I was capable of being. I learned to be happy alone, which was a different thing entirely from being lonely. Loneliness was wanting connection and not having it. Being alone was choosing solitude and finding peace in it. I had been lonely my entire life, surrounded by family. Now I was alone and finally content. My parents called less frequently. They had learned that I wouldn't come running anymore, and without my consistent presence, I had faded from their daily thoughts. It should have hurt. In the old timeline, it would have devastated me. But I had already died from their neglect once. I wouldn't make that mistake again. Then, one morning in spring, my mother called with news that made my coffee go cold in my hand. Isabella was sick, very sick. The same genetic heart condition that had killed me in my first life. She needed surgery. Expensive surgery. They didn't have enough money. I listened to my mother explain through tears. The tests, the diagnosis, the doctor's recommendations. Isabella had ignored the symptoms for months. Chest pain she had attributed to stress. Fatigue she had blamed on raising young children. By the time she finally went to the hospital, the damage was significant. The old Eleanor would have immediately offered everything she had, would have bankrupted herself to save her sister, would have proven her love through financial sacrifice. But I understood now that love given to people who wouldn't give it back was just a different kind of suicide. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said carefully. "What do the doctors say about her prognosis?" My mother explained the surgery, the good success rate if they could afford the procedure, the risks if they waited too long, the mounting costs that insurance wouldn't fully cover. "Can you help?" my mother asked finally. "Eleanor, please, she's your sister." My sister who had let me wait at the airport. My sister who had taken my old room and my parents' attention and never once asked if I was okay. My sister who existed in the centre of the family portrait while I had been cropped out frame by frame. "I can't afford it," I said. It wasn't true. I had savings, significant savings from 2 years of not spending money on flights home and gifts no one appreciated and efforts no one acknowledged. But those savings were mine. They were the proof that I had value, that my work mattered, that I could build something for myself. "You have a good job," my mother pressed. "You just got promoted. You don't have children or a mortgage. Surely you can spare something." The old guilt rose up like a familiar ghost, but I had already died to that ghost. "I have my own life to think about," I said quietly. "I have my own future to secure. I'm sorry, but no." The silence on the other end was thunderous. "I can't believe you would be so selfish," my mother said finally, her voice shaking with rage and disbelief. "Your sister is dying and you won't help her." "She's not dying," I said. "She needs surgery. That's different. And there are payment plans, medical loans, fundraising options. You'll find a way. We're family, Eleanor. Family helps each other. Family also picks each other up from airports, I said quietly. Family also remembers birthdays. Family also asks how you're doing without wanting something in return." "So this is punishment? You're punishing us?" "No," I said honestly. "I'm just not setting myself on fire to keep you warm anymore. If this is about the birthday party years ago, it's not about anything specific," I interrupted. "It's about everything general. It's about decades of being the daughter you only remembered when you needed something. I'm done." "She could die," my mother said, voice breaking. "We all could," replied. "I almost did once, in a guest room in your house, and no one even noticed until morning. That was from the other timeline, but the emotion was real enough." "What are you talking about?" "Never mind," I said. "I hope you find the money. I hope Isabella recovers, but I can't help you." I ended the call before she could say anything more. I sat in my apartment for a long time after that, waiting to feel guilty, waiting to feel cruel. But mostly I just felt tired. Tired of being the backup plan. Tired of being the wallet they opened only when they needed it. Tired of proving my worth to people who had already decided I didn't have any. Isabella had the surgery anyway. They found the money from somewhere. Maybe they took out loans. Maybe extended family contributed. Maybe they sold things or set up a crowdfunding page. I didn't ask. I didn't look. She recovered well, according to the brief updates my mother sent by text. Updates that didn't ask how I was doing. Updates that simply informed me of their continued existence without acknowledging mine. I sent a card when I heard Isabella was home from the hospital. A simple, "Glad you're recovering," with no money, no promises, no olive branch. Just basic human decency extended to someone I happened to be related to. Isabella called me a week later. Her voice was weak but alive. "Thank you for the card," she said. "You're welcome." "Mum told me you wouldn't help with the surgery." No accusation in her voice. Just statement, just fact. "I couldn't," I said. "Or wouldn't," she replied quietly. "Maybe both." Silence stretched between us. Then, "I don't understand what happened to you, Eleanor. You used to be so available." Available, what a word for it. What a perfect, terrible word. I'm still available, I said, just not for free anymore, not for people who only call when they need something. That's cruel. Is it? You all forgot to pick me up from the airport for Dad's birthday. You forgot I was coming. You forgot I existed. Was that cruel? She was quiet for a long moment. What are you talking about? You didn't come to that party. You said work was too busy. And there it was, the divergence. In this timeline, I hadn't gone, hadn't waited, hadn't been forgotten because I hadn't given them the chance. But in my heart, in my memory, it had already happened. The wound existed even if the event didn't. You're right, I said. I didn't come. Because I knew what would happen if I did. I knew I would wait and hope and try, and nothing would change. You're not making sense. I know, I said. Never mind. I hope you feel better soon, Isabella. I really do. Eleanor, I ended the call. The rest of that year passed quietly. I continued building my life. I got a cat, a grey tabby I named Sage, who sat on my balcony and watched birds and kept me company, without demanding anything I couldn't give. I took a solo trip to Iceland and stood under the northern lights and felt something cosmic and vast that had nothing to do with family or obligation or proving my worth. I made peace with the fact that my family and I existed in parallel realities. They had their version of me, the cold, distant daughter who had inexplicably withdrawn. I had my version of them, the family who loved the idea of me, but not the reality. Neither version was entirely true or entirely false. My father's 73rd birthday came and went without acknowledgement. They didn't invite me. I didn't ask to come. The silence between us grew comfortable, familiar, like an old coat that had finally been broken in properly. I focused on my work, my friends, my small joys. I learned to cook properly instead of surviving on takeout. I joined a book club and discovered I loved discussing literature with strangers who became friends. I started running in the mornings and found that physical movement helped quiet the mental noise that still occasionally tried to tell me I was being selfish or cruel. Then, one afternoon in late autumn, a package arrived at my office. Inside were 2 first-class tickets, Singapore to my hometown and back. The dates covered my father's upcoming 74th birthday weekend. There was a note in my mother's handwriting. Please come. We miss you. We want to make things right. First class this time, so you'll be comfortable. We've changed, Eleanor. Please give us a chance. I held the tickets in my hands and felt nothing at first. Then slowly something like sadness crept in. Not for myself, for them. They thought this could be solved with comfort, with luxury seating and priority boarding. They thought the problem was the journey, not the destination. They still didn't understand that they had never picked me up. Not from the airport, not from the floor where I had collapsed, not from the edge where I had been standing for years, waiting for them to notice I was there. I put the tickets in my desk drawer. Days passed, my mother called. Did you get the tickets? I did. Will you come? Eleanor, those tickets cost us nearly $3,000. We saved for months. Your father specifically asked for you this time. Did he? Or did she want me there because she had finally realised that a daughter who didn't come home was a daughter who might not come back at all? I don't think so, I said finally. Eleanor, those tickets were expensive. We sacrificed to buy them. We're trying to show you that you matter to us. Tickets aren't proof that I matter, I said quietly. Being picked up when I arrive would have been. Being remembered on my own birthday would have been. Being asked how I'm doing just because, not because you need something. That would have been proof. Your birthday is in November, my mother said. Yes, the same week as Dad's. It has been my entire life. This year marks my 35th birthday. I've spent every birthday of my adult life celebrating his instead of mine, because His milestones always seemed more important. This year, I'm celebrating my own. I had never said these words before, in either timeline. I had swallowed them down year after year, telling myself it didn't matter, that his milestone birthdays were more important, that I could celebrate mine alone. But I was done swallowing. We could celebrate both, my mother offered weakly. We could make it about both of you. But you won't, I said, because you never have. And that's okay. You don't have to. But I also don't have to come. The tickets are non-refundable, Eleanor. They're just going to go to waste. Then they're yours to keep or give to someone else. I hope you have a lovely party. This time when she started to protest, I didn't hang up. I just waited. Waited for her to say something that would change the mathematics of our relationship. Something that would prove she saw me as more than a missing piece in their family portrait. But she didn't. She just sighed and said, "I don't understand you anymore, Eleanor." "You never did," I said gently. "That's the problem." After that call, I blocked out the weekend of my father's birthday. My birthday weekend. I booked myself a spa retreat at a resort in Bali. I invited 3 friends from my book club who had become genuine companions. I planned a celebration that had nothing to do with proving myself or earning love or filling a role I had never been cast for properly. We spent 3 days in luxury, massages and meditation, good food and better conversation. On my actual birthday, we sat on a beach at sunset, and my friend Lisa gave a toast about how she had watched me transform over the past few years, from someone who seemed to carry the world on her shoulders to someone who had learned to put it down. "To Eleanor," she said, raising her glass. "The bravest person I know, not because she's fearless, but because she's learned what's worth being afraid of losing. And she's learned that some things aren't." I cried a little. Happy tears. Grateful tears. The tears of someone who had finally found people who saw her clearly. The ticket sat in my desk drawer, unused. My father's 74th birthday came and went. I didn't call. I didn't send a gift. I simply existed in my own life, celebrating my own milestone, surrounded by people who had chosen to be there. Isabella texted me a photo from the party, a family portrait. My parents, her family, various relatives, an empty space where I might have stood if I had come. The old Eleanor would have felt guilty looking at that space, would have wondered if she should have tried harder, loved better, been more available. But I looked at it and felt only the calm certainty of a choice well made. They had forgotten to pick me up from the airport. In one timeline, literally, in this one, metaphorically, they had left me waiting in arrivals while they carried on with their celebration. They had assumed I would find my own way home, my own way back, my own way into a family that had already learned to function without me. I had sent them first-class tickets to come get me. A generous offer, a comfortable journey, a clear path back to connection. But they had never used them, not because the tickets weren't good enough, but because they had never really wanted to make the journey. They wanted me to come to them, to meet them where they were comfortable, to fit into the space they had allocated for me without demanding anything more. And I had finally learned to say no. I deleted Isabella's text without responding. I poured myself a glass of wine. I stood at my apartment window and looked out at the city lights, at the life I had built from nothing but the ashes of the one that had killed me. Somewhere across the ocean, my family was probably talking about me, wondering what had changed, painting me as cold or distant or ungrateful. They would tell stories about the daughter who had become a stranger, the sister who had hardened her heart. They would never understand that they had created this version of me through years of casual neglect, that this distance was not punishment but survival, and that was okay. I had spent one lifetime dying from their inability to love me properly. I wouldn't spend this one doing the same. The first-class tickets would expire. the expiration date passing unremarked in some file or drawer. The empty space in their family portrait would remain empty, and I would continue forward into a life where my presence was not an afterthought, where my absence was actually noticed, where love was not something I had to earn through sacrifice and silence. Months later, I heard through a distant cousin that my mother had framed those tickets, had hung them in the hallway with a note that said, "For Eleanor, who never came home." A strange sort of memorial to the daughter they had lost through their own neglect, but still couldn't quite understand or accept. I thought about that frame sometimes, about the performance of grief for an absence they had created, about the irony of memorializing expensive tickets while never acknowledging the expensive emotional labor I performed for years. But mostly I didn't think about it at all. I had been given a second chance, not to fix them, not to make them see me, but to finally see myself clearly, to understand that my worth was not determined by their recognition, that I could walk away from people who forgot to pick me up, that I could stop waiting in arrivals for someone who would never come. I raised my glasses to my reflection in the window, to the woman who had died alone and come back stronger, to the woman who had learned that the only rescue that mattered was the one you gave yourself. Behind me, Sage meowed softly, reminding me it was time for dinner. I smiled and turned away from the window, from the city lights, from the vast distance between me and a family that still didn't understand what they had lost. Tomorrow I had plans, real plans, a gallery opening with friends, a morning run through the botanical gardens, a life that belonged entirely to me. Tomorrow I would live, and they would continue to wonder why I never came home, why those expensive tickets went unused, why their daughter had chosen distance over dysfunction. Let them wonder. Let them feel the absence they had created. Let them sit with the empty chair at their table and finally, belatedly, understand what it meant to wait for someone who wasn't coming. I had waited for them for years, in airports and guest rooms and hospital beds. I had waited for acknowledgement, for love, for basic human consideration. Now it was their turn to wait, and unlike them, I had learned to be comfortable with the silence. I closed my eyes and felt peace settle over me like a blanket, the kind of peace that comes from finally putting down a burden you were never meant to carry. I had died once from loving people who couldn't love me back. I would spend the rest of this life loving myself instead. And, somewhere across the ocean, 2 first-class tickets gathered dust in a frame. A gift that was never meant to be accepted. A gesture that came too late and meant too little. A monument to the gap between intention and action. Between wanting to fix something and understanding what was actually broken. They had forgotten to pick me up from the airport. So I had learned to fly on my own, and I had discovered that I preferred it that way.